Apologies, we're just modifying the speaker list. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Welcome to this evening's Planning South Committee, which will determine the planning applications as per the agenda. Thank you for attending this evening. Any public speakers have been made aware by the officers of the procedure of the meeting. I remind you that this is not a public meeting, but a meeting in which the public has been invited. When invited to speak, please keep your speech to the allotted time that you've been given. We are not expecting a fire drill today, so should you hear the alarm, please make your way to the nearest fire exits, which is over there and behind us, and then make your way to the centre of Horsham. Remember to turn off mobile phones or turn them to silent. And when speaking, please make sure you speak into the microphone. And when finished, please turn that off. And that equally applies to the members as well. May I also remind council members and the public that this committee meeting is being live streamed and you should behave accordingly. When voting, please could members make sure that their arms are clearly raised so we get an accurate count. And for those members I've not met, members of the public and those on the live stream, I am Councillor Ellis Brown and I shall be chairing this evening's meeting. Before we proceed, could the officers please introduce themselves? The officers on my right first.
Good evening, Adrian Smith, Major Applications Team Leader, and I'll be presenting items 9, 10 and 11 tonight.
Nick Pettifer, Senior Planning Officer.
And Emma Parks, the Head of Development and Building Control.
Claire Brown, Principal Planning Solicitor.
Judy Carboni, Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you very much. First item on the agenda is apologies for absence.
And we have apologies from Councillor Emma Beard and from Councillor Claudia Fisher.
Thank you. Yes, Mike.
Can I offer apologies from Councillor Marks as well, please?
Okay, thank you very much. Agenda item number 2 is the appointment of the Vice Chair. As you know, Councillor Knowles is stepping down as Vice Chair. It's therefore necessary to appoint a new Vice Chair for the rest of the municipal year. Do we have a nominee, please? Councillor Clark.
I'd like to nominate Councillor Lynn Lambert, please.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder?
I'll be more than happy to second Councillor Lambert. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I just take a vote on all those supportive of Councillor Lynn Lambert being the new Vice Chair of the committee?
That's unanimous.
That's unanimous, and therefore Councillor Lambert is duly elected as Vice Chair, and I invite you to join me at the table here, please. Moving to agenda item number 3, the minutes of the previous meeting. Does anyone want to raise anything regarding the minutes from the previous meeting, or can I take them as agreed? Agreed? Thank you. Declarations of interest, item number 4. Councillor Campbell.
I just wanted to say I'm acquainted with Gillian Marks, and he's going to be speaking on the Efterworth Cottage application. We're both members of Pulborough Parish Council.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell, and that will equally applies to myself as well. Thank you. Announcements from the Chair. or Chief Exec. None from the Chief Exec, but I have 3 items to announce. Firstly, I'd like to thank Councillor Joanne Knowles for her support and guidance over the last 15 months, as Vice Chair of this committee. Those of you who've gone through the pack will notice that the appeals have not been included in the committee report. They have been circulated to members and will be considered at the next meeting of this planning committee. Regarding application DC 221552 in section 7.1 of the committee report, it reads the application be approved subject to the following conditions. This should in fact read the application be refused, and it's clear from the recommendation on page 13 of the committee report that the application is refused. So moving on to item number 6, we will miss that because we'll consider those at the next meeting. The first item to consider, application to consider, is item number 7, which is DC 221552 field land south of Thistledown, Billingshurst. Please could I invite the officer to present the application to committee.
Thank you. The application site comprises an agricultural field north of Ashington built-up area boundary, which runs to about 5.5 hectares. We have public rights of way crossing the agricultural fields and along the southern side, and listed buildings also within the vicinity, which are marked with a star. Also of note is the medium and high risk surface water flow path across the north of the site and the entrance, which you can see with the 2 blue parallel lines on the plan. The site plan shows the proposed barn and hard standing located in the northern corner of the site, using the access route off the EXB 2133, which joins the public highway just by Prior's Barn, which is a listed building. Previous permission was granted for an area of hard standing under DC 211613, with access off the public highway stated to be required for the stationing of farm equipment and culverted to maintain land drainage over the existing ditch. So this little diagram here shows the previous hard standing and access that was approved, and the red line shows the proposed location of a hard standing and barn. The current proposal is for a new barn, an area of hard standing within the field, measuring some 30.5 metres by 18.2 metres, with an eaves height of 5.8 metres and a ridge height of 8.5 metres, amounting to about 557 square metres. The proposed barn is stated to provide vehicle and equipment storage for the applicant's tree surgery business, as well as for the maintenance of the landholding on which the barn sits, reflecting the B8 storage and distribution use class. Here are the elevations of the barn and a floor plan showing the internal arrangement of the equipment that's needed to be stored. We have some site photos here showing Prior's Barn, which lies to the north, the access, which is the EXB 2133, and then the red arrow, which indicates where the barn would be behind that tree boundary, and again, when seen across the field from the public right of way. Officers have carefully assessed the proposal and recognise that there is justification in providing some form of covered and secure machinery storage for equipment needed to maintain the landholding, as there is no associated farmhouse or existing barns on the land. However, as the barn would also provide for the storage needs of a commercial business, which is the B8 use, the question arises on whether there is justifiable need for this to be located within a rural location. Aligned with the proposed B8 use of the new barn is the consideration that, in the event that permission is granted, this would have a commercial storage and distribution use class, which could lead to the employees being based at the site, thus leading to a potential water demand. The current position forwarded by the applicant is that the building would be used for the storage of equipment needed for the applicant's business, which will be collected and dropped off each day with no staff based at the site. However, officers recognise that this could not be conditioned to restrict future occupiers of the site, and that therefore the proposed development must be capable of demonstrating a water neutral position at the point of determination. The application is recommended for refusal, with further reasons relating to the as yet unsecured position in relation to great crested newts, and the high and medium surface water flood risk at the site. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. The first speaker this evening is on this particular item is Faye Lewis. And I remind you have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm the owner of Prior's Barn, grade 2 listed, and this is on behalf of our neighbours.
Sorry to interrupt you. Could you just speak a little closer to the microphone? Thank
Okay.
you.
And on behalf of our neighbours at Thistledown who couldn't attend today. So the first concern is the ex-old B2133 has unmade and broken road surface. This lane serves access to our property Prior's Barn and the odd agricultural tractor infrequently each year. With the planned heavy machinery and vehicle used by tree smiths, the ex-old road surface will degrade quickly. The current surface condition is not fit for commercial or heavy traffic use. It will require resurfacing and maintaining. Currently, it's not maintained by the council. We propose that either tree smiths or the council commit to the maintenance of the lane so it to be fit for purpose. Number 2, traffic, parking and access problems to our home, Prior's Barn. If tree smiths machinery and vehicles are queued along the lane, this will affect access to our driveway. We have school drop-off and pick-up times, so our children require constant access to our driveway. Our driveway cannot be blocked at any time. Residential amenity noise pollution levels will increase with the use of machinery and vehicles entering and exiting our small lane and along the track leading to the proposed storage barn. Number 4, it has been outlined if the I'm not used to public speaking. It has not been outlined if the proposed vehicle storage barn will be used for additional purposes, i.e. chipping or cutting wood. This would create unwanted antisocial machinery noise for surrounding properties and residents. Number 5, the storage barn hours of use have not been outlined. How often will machinery need to be accessed and how often will the lane be used? Will machinery need to be accessed during out of hours, non-business hours? This could cause additional unwanted noise disturbance to surrounding homes. Number 6, hazardous turning for tree smiths, slow-moving machineries and vehicles from the ex-old B2133 onto the main road, Billingshurst Road. Cars and motorbikes currently overtake unsafely at high speeds in this location, where the speed limit increases to a national speed limit from a 30-mile-per-hour zone. We have witnessed many potential road accidents here, especially with horse trucks slowing to enter and exit the equine hospital. This would be exacerbated further with tree smiths.
Could I ask you to bring your comments to a conclusion,
slow and
please?
heavy machinery turning in the same location. So we would basically look for a road calming to a 30-mile-per-hour. And the final point we have is the loss of natural space and wildlife in the open countryside location, where we see deer, foxes, and birds of prey, multitude of insects.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Charlie Smith. And you have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening. Treesons Limited are a small tree surgery and forestry business employing around 30 staff from across the district. As Tier 1 contractors for 2 of the UK's designated network operators, we manage trees and vegetation in close proximity to high and low voltage power lines to maintain safety and continuity of electrical supply across the region, and were considered key workers throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. A machinery store was deemed necessary at our land in Ashington to store machinery in relation to maintaining the land and also to keep a small amount of tree smiths vehicles as we have outgrown our current site. It was deemed that a 28-day planning notice would be acceptable. However, we wanted to be completely above board and made the decision to undertake a full planning application consisting of a dual-purpose barn. We initially believed the planning application was deemed viable, and we have spent a vast amount of time and financial resource over the past 2 years providing the council with various reports, including ecology, arboriculture and bat reports. As you mentioned, the application has been recommended for refusal on the following points: water neutrality, except that we have stated that we won't have any water there; a lack of an LVIA, when in fact we've been advised by the council we don't need an LVIA; B8 use, this is not B8 use, this is agricultural forestry use in relation to maintaining the land; commercial premises would not be viable or financially viable; flooding, we've spent so much time on this, if we'd been told that we needed to provide a sequential test, we'd been more than happy to have done this; and insufficient information regarding the great crested newts. Again, this PEA was supplied to the council September 23 and clearly stated on point 4.7 that the site supports low sustainability for great crested newts. Again, if we'd been advised that we needed to provide further on this, we've been more than happy to have done so. This application has been led to committee due to a family member working for Horsham District Council and an interest that we felt we must disclose. We feel and have been advised that this application may have been subject to additional scrutiny as a result of this. As you can imagine, we're extremely frustrated that it's taken so long to determine this decision. We've spent a lot of time and money getting this application to this stage, when initially we were under the impression that it was going to be recommended for refusal as a result of the many additional documentation we have been asked to supply and the fact that the case officer was drafting conditions for the application initially. Thank you
Could
for
I
your
ask you to
time.
bring your comments to a conclusion, please? Thank
Thank
you.
you for your time. I look forward to the outcome and how best we can move forward with our proposal at the site.
Thank you very much. Okay, moving to the ward members to open the discussion, and that would be Councillor Circus first, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think the parish council have, to my mind, hit the nail on the head quite emphatically, particularly in the first point they make in their objections, where they refer to policy 26 of the HDPF. Development will be considered acceptable where it does not lead either individually or cumulatively to a significant increase in the overall level of activity in the countryside. I think that's a pretty valid point. I have to say that when it comes to water neutrality, I have difficulty sometimes, and I know some of my colleagues do too, in seeing consistency in our approach to water neutrality. I mean, I think that the view in this case is correct, because we were told we had to look at whether a development was water neutral now, and presumably, so far as we can judge it, in perpetuity. And we've looked at this, and others have looked at it. The parish council have, officers have done, and it seems we cannot be confident about water neutrality in the future. And therefore, on that basis, I don't think we're in a position to be satisfied that it is water neutral. I have to say, looking at some of the other cases we'll be looking at tonight, let's just say it's hard to square what I think is the right approach in this case with some of the water neutrality arguments we're going to be looking at later on, but that's later on. I think the case is well made out to refuse this application for the reasons the officers gave and for the reasons the parish council so comprehensively set out. So on that basis, I would vote to refuse this application.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Circus. Councillor Dennis, would you like to add anything there?
To be honest, I have very little to add to that. I was going to actually say the same. I thought the parish councillor hit it on the head. And I have similar concerns about the water neutrality statements as well. So on that premise, you understand where I'm going to vote.
Thank you. Councillor Manson, would you like to add anything to what?
Yes, please, Chairman. Thank you. I would like to ask the officers if they could just clarify me what the current class of use of the agricultural land is. Is it class 1 agricultural, class 2, class 3A? And what is the current farming that is happening on that site? Because I noticed that going back to the planning application of DC 211613, where we apparently approved a hard standing that was some 30 metres by 30 metres, giving 900 square metres in total. We're now looking at a slightly different plan, which seems to have significantly moved the hard standing somewhat to the west. And on my calculations, based on the scale that was given at the bottom of the page, has more than doubled in size to over 2,000 square metres. 2,000 square metres is just the sort of rectangle of the hard standing with the building. It doesn't take into account the splayed road that comes into it. So I think it's significantly in excess of 2,000 square metres. So it's probably doubled or tripled in size, which does give me some cause for concern. And I note that previously the Reading Agricultural Consultants sent a letter in on the 26th of September 22, where their conclusions, it's clear that the applicant's rural business is not associated with the agricultural land it is proposed the building is located on. There is no mention of any agricultural business. The size of the proposed building at 557 square metres has not been justified. And in conclusion, the Reading Agricultural Consultants consider that the applicant's proposal for the erection of a storage barn is not compliant with national and local planning policy. And I don't see that that's really changed much. Perhaps the officers could give their opinion.
Thank you.
Thank you. So in relation to the use class of the existing land, it's agricultural land. It doesn't have a specific use class. It is agricultural use, which covers forestry, horticulture, viticulture. It's all those categories of land use.
Forgive me, it has a grading, doesn't it? Class 1 land, class 2, class
Only
3.
in terms of the quality of the land.
Quality. Sorry, that's the question I was asking, the quality of the land.
I don't know the answer to that. And in relation to the RAC consultation response, they did receive, they did ask for additional information, and that was received, and that is reflected in their comments on the 19th of April 2023, where additional information on the machinery was provided to them. Again, the agricultural consultants have looked at that, and they consider that it's proportionate to the turning required for the machinery being stored on the site. So that was their overall assessment of the needs provided.
Okay, thank you. Any other member like to make a comment on this application at all? Councillor Potts.
Thank you, Chairman. I noticed that it's the contention of the applicant that that they provided everything, or almost everything, that was asked of them, apart from a water neutrality statement, I think it was, because they weren't going to use any water. I just wondered if the officers could comment further on that.
I think, this application, as you can see from the reference number, has been with officers a little while. Nicola is one of the officers that's helping us and assisting us with some of these older applications to move them forward to determination. Ultimately, with this one, you know, it is our view as senior officers that it is a matter of principle in terms of the creation of the B8 use, and so therefore, you know, it wouldn't be beneficial to provide additional information when ultimately our view is the principle is unacceptable. So I think it's if it was acceptable in principle, you know, and we may therefore work to remove those other reasons if that was possible, but ultimately here we have an in principle objection to the creation of a Part B8 use in the countryside, and so therefore we've proceeded with a recommendation on that basis. Thank you.
Okay. Any final comments? Councillor Fletcher.
I had a question in regards to the forestry use. So this application has been put in on the basis that it's mixed use between agriculture and forestry, and I can see the argument that the case of the agricultural use has not been fully made reference to the size of the building. But I'm a little confused about the thing about forestry. Does tree surgery not count as forestry? And if it does count as forestry, when we're looking at the principles of development here under policy 26, it says support the needs of agricultural forestry, but it doesn't say of the land in the same title or the immediate land, and I'm not clear why that's part of the recommendation. If you've got a tree surgery business, it's legitimate to have somewhere to store your equipment, and it doesn't seem to me that it should necessarily be associated with the site at which the tree surgery is happening, because tree surgery by its nature happens all over the place. So I was somewhat confused about that, and say, though overall I take the point about the agriculture side and therefore the size of the building, I'm less convinced about the forestry argument.
I'll comment, but if my colleagues have anything further to add, generally agricultural uses are those which are required to be in a countryside location. So agriculture, you farm the land and therefore you need the building on the land to support that. Forestry is a similar one in terms of, you know, we've had applications where you're managing your woodland, you're chopping down the trees, you know, replanting them, etc. So you need some form of structure on the land to support that. So when we talk about forestry use, it's in relation to the actual land itself and the forestry that's taking place on that land. So there is a difference in planning terms to a forestry use, which is a generally acceptable use in the countryside, rather than a business use, which in this case we consider as a B8 use because it's the storage of business equipment in relation to a particular business. So there's a clear different planning differentiation, is that the right word, between between a B8 use, which is the storage of equipment associated with a business, and a forestry use, which is associated with to actually what you're doing on the land. Does that make sense if I explain that clearly? Thank you.
Okay, moving back to the ward councillors, do you have anything to add before we go to a vote? No? Okay, the recommendation is to refuse planning permissions for the reasons given in section 7.1 of the committee report. Therefore, I propose we vote on this application. Those in favour of the refusal, please show.
I have 16 for.
Any against? Any abstentions? One abstention. Okay.
Abstention.
Okay, therefore the planning application is refused. Thank you. On the agenda, which is the DC 24-0552 Ebsworth Cottage, the street Nutbourne, and I invite the officer to give the report or presentation, sorry.
Thank you. The application site comprises a detached residential property that lies at the northern end of the village and the Nutbourne Conservation Area. The house is a Grade 2 listed building which addresses the public highway with its small side elevation and has a front elevation which faces a sloping garden. There is a fair amount of recent planning history associated with this property, with a couple of cases relevant to the application currently being considered. So planning permission and listed building consent have been granted for a number of works to the property, including the replacement of the thatched roof, internal alterations and single-storey side rear extensions. And in February 2021, a detached double garage and bin log store to the front western side of the property. This application was approved, and it was noted that the property previously had street side lay-by parking at the front eastern side of the property. In June 2023, a second planning application was considered at committee for a detached carport and log store, but situated closer to the listed building than previously approved under DC 20 1972, with works already having begun on the site. Permission was refused at committee for failing to reflect local vernacular character, leading to harm to the listed building and the designated conservation area on account of its mass, scale and overbearing nature. The decision was subsequently appealed and was dismissed by the inspector, finding that the proposed carport would be visible in the street scene and would result in a harmful relationship with the listed building, be visually intrusive and detract from the street scene and detract from the character and appearance of the Nutfield Conservation Area. The proposal now before you seeks permission for the hard standing area to the west of the house, with the existing retaining concrete walls that have already been formed on site to be reduced in height by about ½ metre at the rear and overclad in stone to match the existing boundary wall to the front of the property, with a curved stone capping on the top. The existing concrete parking area and driveway is shown to be overlaid with a resin-bound gravel and a new drainage gully to the front edge of the driveway. This application has arisen as a result of discussions with officers, including the heritage officer. This is a detailed plan showing the current proposed parking area and ground levels, which I appreciate are quite difficult to see, and the relationship to the listed cottage. So just to recap, this is just for the parking area and the retaining walls, which are necessary to hold back the sloping ground around the west and north of the parking area. The elevations here show the reduction in height of the as-built retaining walls and the proposed stone cladding, which is to match the front wall. The application is recommended for approval, noting that there would be a public benefit in providing off-street parking for the property along this narrow lane, which balances the resulting change in the street scene and the impact to the setting of the listed building, which the conservation officer has noted to be harm at the lower end of the scale. Officers consider that the driveway would be open, thus addressing the previously raised concerns regarding the visual impact of the carport and the decreased proximity between the carport as previously proposed and the listed building. This, along with the reduced height of the retaining walls and their overcladding with stone and the resin-bound gravel, is considered to be commensurate with setting of the listed building and the existing stone boundary wall to the frontage of the cottage, and therefore approval is recommended. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could I invite the first speaker, Gilly Markison, please, and remind you have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Hello. Ebsworth Cottage is one of the oldest houses in the village, and it's been very upsetting to see how badly it suffered from all the recent alterations, including the demolition of a listed boundary wall and a listed outbuilding against all regulations. I'm speaking for the Nutfield Conservation and History Group and for just about most people in the village. We strongly oppose the latest car parking design on 4 major points. Firstly, the proposal to face the existing unapproved concrete walling with Horsham stone
This would appear very regular and formal and would not in any way match the existing wall or any of the listed walls in the rest of Nutbourne, which are important for the look of the village. A traditional stone wall at least 12 inches thick in front of and tied to the concrete will be much more in keeping and acceptable. And I also think it's very important that it should all be reduced down to ground level, the north and the west bit, to lessen the visual impact. Secondly, if the current concrete base has to remain, then it will be better covered with flint gravel and the remaining area to have a permeable base, for example, gravel shingle to prevent water discharge into the road. A gully drain is not possible due to the hard sandstone subterrane. Thirdly, the proposed wall extends over the roadside verge to the west, beyond the property boundary, so that should be amended. Fourthly, it's extremely wide, more than is necessary for a double garage, and it extends very close to the house. And the area that is currently excavated is wider still and doesn't seem to match the site plan. And it's unclear to me what is happening with that and how it is to be landscaped. The whole parking area is very close to the house and extremely dominating, and in my opinion has completely ruined what was once a very lovely listed cottage. And so many other options are available which would have been less imposing. One suggestion was a single covered garage with a green roof landscaped into the garden with open parking around it. However, a low stone walled open garage would be much more acceptable. There is a lot of strong feeling about this in the village, so I hope you take these points into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Ewan Clark, please, and you have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening. We've been asked to represent the applicant, to speak on their behalf. We understand the proposed development has both the support of Horsham District Council Planning Officer and Conservation Officer. It's been recommended for approval by this committee. Principle of development on the site to create off-road parking has been deemed. Sorry.
It's difficult to hear you. I wonder whether you
Sorry.
could put the microphone a bit
Sorry.
closer.
I think it's on. Is it on? Is it on? Sorry. Principle of development on the site to create off-road parking has been deemed acceptable by the council in the past, although the approved scheme was undeliverable due to the site's topography and the neighbouring trees. The applicant has worked positively with the local authority in both this application and previously refused carport application, with on-site consultations undertaken to discuss the options and agree the way forwards. The proposals seek to reduce the impact of the previously constructed retaining structure by reducing the overall height of the walls to approximately 1.8 metres above the finished surface level. The exposed concrete walls be clad with stonework to match that present on the site with stone coping detail. The stonework will reduce the visual impact of the retaining structure by visually tying the parking area back to the extended street side walling. Demolition of the eastern retaining wall has opened up the parking area when viewed from the highway, therefore reducing perceived harm to the listed building to less than substantial. Although there's an acknowledged impact on the street scene and the setting of the listed building, the impact has been reduced and any visual harm has been offset by the benefit of creating the off-street parking and reduce the impact on the narrow dead-end road. Can I just add, in terms of the stonework, we'd be happy to accept a condition about sample panels if that's something that would be acceptable. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. All on the ward councillors first, and Councillor Campbell.
Yeah, so obviously I note the comments made in the report about the from the Horsham District Council Conservation Officer stating that there will be the impact of the development would be harmful, although obviously it would be offset by the provision of off-street parking. However, my main concern is around the material used for the base of the hard standing, and the fact that even though that there's going to be a gully drain put in, there's no detail around where that gully drain would lead to. And you know, obviously, and if the gully became blocked, there would still be runoff from the non-permeable surface onto the road. And I just wondered if we could get any more detail around that.
Thank you. As I understand it, the parking area is a sort of a structural slab, which I believe is tied to the retaining walls. So that's kind of hold back the earth around the north and the west side. We don't have details of drainage, but it is a condition that we could request details of if members felt it was necessary.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. To say that Ebsworth Cottage is a litigious site and one that's caused many problems is an understatement. This site, looking at what's being proposed at the moment, I mean, the points have already been made both by the parish council speaker and by my colleague. The issue of the concrete walls are impermeable, and facing them with dressed stone, if they were random and of proper thickness, then they would appear to be natural and in keeping with the village instead of being a modern type of fixture. So the problem with what's being proposed is you don't want any industrial looking construction. You want something that looks natural as it can be. And also in contradiction with the appeal statement, I mean, basically there was little, in the appeal statement, it basically said the inspector raised the point of no or little benefit to the community of parking in this way. I've raised the point with officers about resin bound, and okay, resin bound is considered to be permeable as against other options. But the problem is it's sitting on a concrete base, which basically means it's impermeable. Now it's being proposed to put in a gully, which is going to be necessary. But the problem is it doesn't say, as my colleague said, where the gully is going to go. And I actually think we do need a planning condition, or at least either that or a delay in this application to understand where the water is going to flow. Because in the winter, it gets quite wet down there. And if you're going to get runoff from the car parking area into the lane, it's just going to make things worse. So I am quite concerned about the proposal of under 6.1 of going ahead with what's being proposed with the gully and the resin bonded gravel. I'm also quite concerned of the overbearing impact of that whole size of the car parking area. There's already been appeal that has been upheld about the overbearing mass and size of the garage. It's been reduced. But I still think that the open plan aspect of the car parking in front of the building is overbearing and is damaging of the building, and I think it should be reduced. So I'm not very happy about this planning proposal.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously the scale of it is a matter of judgment, and obviously you've got the officer's report there and the comments of the conservation officer. With regard to the other matters in terms of drainage and materials, obviously members should be minded that if you know conditions could be added to address your concerns, then that's what we should do, such as you know, not if you're unhappy with not seeing materials, for instance, you could add a condition that says, notwithstanding the materials submitted, details shall be submitted to and approved in writing, or a drainage scheme to be submitted. So that's within your remit to consider if you wish. Obviously the scale of it is a more matter of principle, and obviously you've got the detailed assessment from officers before you recommending approval. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. As Councillor Clark, do you want to come? No, okay. As the other board member, I shall pass on this for the moment. Before we come back to the potential condition, does anyone else wish to make a comment on this? Councillor Circus.
To say that this is an owner who has displayed a lack of sensitivity with this site is a very considerable understatement. And we've had this site before us on a number of occasions, and we've all bemoaned the lack of sensitivity in this important site. We've been saying, or it's been said, that it's out of character. I think a point that really weighs heavily on the out of character point is really that this is it's a very small village. And therefore, when you have a property where any development is out of character, it has a much greater effect on the street scene and on the village than perhaps would be the case in a larger village. And the head of development will recognise the point I'm now going to make, because I used to make it with considerable regularity. But if we look at what our conservation officer has said, no objection, I think it would be a great mistake to take that at face value. Because if you read the report, there clearly is the acknowledgement of harm. And of course, in the last sentence, I am conflicted in this case, but I'm willing to accept that on balance, the point, as the head of development will remember, I used to make with considerable regularity on other applications. What on balance means that the judgment in this case of the officer could have gone either way. That's how close it is. Just simply to look at the comment, no objection, is simply inadequate from the point of view of the conservation officer's comments. I would agree. I mean, I don't know what the ward councillors intend to do, but I would certainly support either a refusal or a deferral to see whether some further improvement could be made to this site, given the very substantial issues that have been raised and the importance of it in terms of the street scene and the character of such a small and quite attractive village in our community. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Councillor Manton.
Thank you, Chairman. Perhaps the officers could help me here with some idea of the size of this parking area, because when I sit here and I look at that plan, the two sort of squares that form this area, to my mind, in square footage, exceed that of the total cottage itself. So I don't quite know how wide that parking area is. I mean, how many cars could you park on that? I fail to see why it needs to be that width and come up so close to a Grade 2 listed building. I am minded to object on the grounds of scale in this space. Perhaps you could give me the benefit of your experience in this matter.
Thank you.
Thank you. I will find the dimensions, but I will bring up another slide, if I may, which shows the scheme as it was previously approved. And you can see there's a vehicle shown in the driveway. So that the green is the outline of the current proposal, and the underlay is the approved garage and parking area to the front. So I just thought that might be quite helpful. But I will try and find the dimensions of that for you.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Dennis.
Yeah, I want to repeat what my colleagues have said, and they've brought up many of the points that I have, but particularly if I put in.
If you could speak closer to the microphone.
Sorry. And particularly in points of the gully, I'd be very concerned about drainage on that particular lane. It is a lane and it's quite muddy. I can imagine the water pouring down when it rains and make it even worse there. And it has done actually to some extent since the building work, the stone cladding too. But what I wanted to say is even though you'll put conditions down, how do we know these people are going to comply with it? Because if I look at their current application permitted in 2020 and 2020, when they've got replacement of the roof covering with plain handmade clay tiles, has anyone actually checked that they're actually handmade clay tiles? Because everybody I know who walks past them says they're machine.
That was the subject of a separate
Giving it an example of
No,
the
I
fact that would they
appreciate that,
comply?
Councillor Dennis, but that matter was closed. I think there was a matter of differing opinion between council officers and some representations on that matter, but that's not material today. I think you know, appreciate there may be an opinion around whether or not conditions are complied with, but in planning terms, if there's a condition that you can add to make the development acceptable, that's what you should do. If that's not complied with, there are other ways in which that can be enforced. So whilst I understand the concern, it's unfortunately not something you can give weight to as part of our planning assessment today. Thank you.
Thank you. Any, yes, Councillor Fletcher.
I'd several points here. I'd like the officer's comment on the member of the public's point about the concrete wall going over the verge and whether that actually is something that's going over highways land or causing a problem as far as that's concerned. I was quite surprised at the suggestion that this should have a resin bonded surface on it, because that's not a traditional treatment that you'd expect to be sympathetic to the character of the building. And as Councillor Clark points out, it's not going to help in terms of permeability. So if we are going to pass this, I would like to see something along the lines of what the officer was saying about having a condition to say notwithstanding the materials already submitted, and that to include the resin surface. Obviously putting down gravel on top of concrete wouldn't help permeability either, but there are surfaces that might be more sympathetic to the building than I would have thought that a resin bonded surface was. And the last point I wanted to make was about the size. Now, maybe as we've been told, size is more fundamental here. But this is a very marginal decision, obviously, if you look at the previously approved and the current application. But the decision has been, or the judgment has been made, that there's a significant difference in the locations between what was approved and what is there now. So, and I think it is right. It's a very visually intrusive size of parking area, particularly given that this is not on a level ground, so that you've got the sort of walled effect on either side. So if we're looking at whether or not we'd like to approve this with conditions, I'd like a little more guidance on whether there is any wriggle room in terms of the size of the parking space in order to reduce the impact on the building.
Thank you.
I think if as I said before, if conditions can be added, such as changing the materials or details of drainage, etc., that can be managed by conditions. I think if you're wanting changes to the actual scale of the development itself, I think that's a different application essentially than what you've got before you. I think you know, I really the scale and the general proposal is obviously what's being applied for. So I do think members need to consider that. As I said, if there are matters that can be addressed by condition, you can add them on, but you can't fundamentally change a scheme from what's before you. Members obviously should be mindful of what's already been granted, and you've got that plan in front of you, you know, and really the question is, you know, that's been granted and was considered acceptable. Obviously this doesn't have a structure, so it's an area of hard surfacing which could be surfaced in an alternative material if members are not satisfied with what's before you. So I think members need to be mindful of what's been granted and the impact that that would have, and consider that alongside the proposal before you and the ability to add conditions on if you consider those are necessary to make it acceptable. Thank you.
And the verge point? It looks like it abuts the metal edge of the carriageway from the diagrams.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Yes, it doesn't come out to the, I visited the site. Hasten to add, I didn't go on the site, but I drove past it and it doesn't come as far as it perceived to be on the drawing. Councillor Mike, I'll come to you in a moment. Councillor Croker, sorry, I missed you before.
Thank you, Chair. Just to help Councillor Manton, I made it 6 metres wide, 11.5 metres deep, so 75 square metres. I was going to make the point that the conservation officer sees the provision of parking as a benefit, off-road parking as a benefit. Given the width of the lane, I'm inclined to agree, but 75 square metres of hard surface just seems totally out of proportion in this case. Thank you.
Councillor Dennis.
Yeah, I was going to ask about the track, because it is a track, it's not really a lane, is it? Let's face it, it's not a conventional road with in any shape or form. Is it a private road? I should have checked actually before I came out.
It is tarmacked.
Yes, but it's
narrow.
fairly
It is rather narrow.
It's extremely narrow, yeah.
And it would be difficult. I think it's about 4 or 5 properties beyond this.
Oh yeah, I know it well. I've walked it.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And they would have difficulty, I think, if a large vehicle was to try and navigate past cars parked in that little narrow lane.
Sorry, I didn't get an answer. Is it an adopted road or is it non-adopted roads?
We don't have that information, I'm afraid, Councillor Dennis.
Okay, in order to, anybody want to make one final comment before I make anything else? No? Okay, to move forward, do the members want to put conditions in, or do you want to take a vote on this particular application for you right now?
So councillors, obviously there's been some discussion tonight and a number of concerns raised, some of which I think could probably be addressed by conditions, others are perhaps more fundamental. So really it's members' decision and how we proceed here. Obviously we can proceed with the vote on the recommendations printed. There can be an alternative motion, or which could be an refusal, or could obviously suggest conditions which you might consider address your concerns. So I think we need to move forward and make a decision. So we need one of those. Thank you.
Okay. Nobody wishing to put forward an alternative motion? Oh, Councillor Clark.
Reluctantly. I'd like to put forward an alternative motion that we approve this condition with the following extra conditions. The first is that the condition for approval of the facing of the walls needs to be agreed and needs to be examined by the local members and officers for a clear plan forward for the visual impact of the car parking area. The second condition is that we agree the surfacing of the parking area and the substrate thereof in terms of drainage. And I do word that very carefully, substrate thereof, in view of water runoff and potential water runoff, because you've indicated it's concrete underneath. The third condition is a condition of clear plan for the drainage of surface water and the runoff, and where the water runoff will go in terms of being controlled, so it just doesn't run off into the wild, so to speak. Because as was pointed out by Councillor Croker, 75 square meters, I'm not going to bore you with the calculations of how much water that is, but it's quite a lot. So if councillors are minded to accept that we have a modified resolution, those would be the sort of conditions I would propose. And, you know, I rely on officers to tell me whether that makes sense or not. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, so the motion is to approve subject to the recommendation conditions, including 3 extra conditions. The first is details of the facing walls to be agreed with local members and officers. The second is for details of the surfacing of the parking area and the substrate thereof, including means of drainage. And the third condition is the clear plan for the surface water drainage of the car parking area.
Councillor Fletcher.
Just a point of clarification. When Councillor Clark read out his conditions, I wasn't sure that he was covering the visual impact of the surfacing of the base or not. It sounded more with the officers, though it probably was included. I'm going to suggest that we make it clear that we are including not just the drainage characteristics of the surfacing, but also the visual impact.
Thank you, Chairman. That was the gist of what I wanted to say, but I didn't specify it carefully enough. When you're writing these conditions quickly, you miss stuff.
Councillor van der Burg.
I'll happily second that.
But Councillor Croker, sorry, apologies.
Thank you. Just to help Councillor Dennis, according to Parish Online, it is part of the public. It's maintained by West Sussex. Thank you.
Councillor Knoll.
Just for clarification, Chairman, is this condition that's being suggested by Councillor Clark including the removal of the present concrete base? Because whatever we do to the surface, or whatever condition we put on the surface, if the base remains concrete, then nothing's going to get soaked away and it's all still going to run into the road.
The proposal is to retain the concrete base and to surface it. So I think that's what members need to consider. Obviously, if you're removing the concrete base, my view is it's a different scheme. That doesn't mean that it can't be adapted in some way to ensure that there is an acceptable drainage scheme. But I think the intention is not to completely remove the concrete, because my view is that is part of the proposal. I think if that's what members wanted, I think we might maybe suggest deferral, but my understanding is, because that has been discussed with the applicants, is that, you know, that they consider there is a drainage solution whilst retaining the concrete base, and that therefore that is the proposal. It's not the proposal to remove it. And I would just be a bit concerned that that is a different scheme, because obviously this is part retrospective in effect. So that's what they're seeking to retain.
Councillor Clark.
So, Chairman, if I may withdraw my amendment, then my proposal, and basically seek instead that we defer it to clarify exactly the drainage and the treatment of how the water is treated on the runoff, please.
Read that out, please. Sorry, Councillor Finnegan. Sorry.
Just a quick question, Chair. If we're going back to defer it, can we relook at the size at the same time? Thank you. I think this goes back to, are you considering this scheme or a different scheme? So, and I think we are, you know, if we're starting considering the scale, my view is you're you're wanting a different scheme to then that's been submitted. So you either determine what you have, you know, and they may wish to come in with something different or appeal it or whatever. So I think clarifying the drainage, I think that's something that could be under the deferral. If you're asking for something to fundamentally change about the proposal itself, then my view is that that's beyond what would be reasonable as part of a deferral. So, but members need to be clear, obviously, because if you are deferring it for those reasons, it would be unreasonable to then raise other concerns when it came back to committee. Thank you.
Councillor Dennis.
Just a pretty quick one to say that it's rather interesting, isn't it, that we gave permission for this garage in the first place, or garage in the first place, for a cottage, where it obviously looks like it's over 2 cars are allowed to park there, and yet on our new house builds it's between 1.5 and 2.2. So it does look a fairly overkill, doesn't it, of off-street parking compared to what we'd see normally. I'm just making that comment for future reference as well.
Okay, thank you.
So the revised motion is to defer to clarify the proposed drainage and how surface water will be treated from the development. And also the materials. I didn't hear that in the deferral. Yeah.
So I've basically withdrawn the motion where I had those 3 conditions, and basically.
Therefore, Councillor Clark, your motion has changed to deferral. That's what my colleague was saying. That's all right. That was my understanding. You withdrew your motion to approve it, and your alternative motion is to defer it for those reasons.
To defer it so that we clarify the drainage and how the surface water will be treated. In view of what's just been said, is also that we should also look at the other things that I had linked in my conditions for further clarification, basically.
Thank you.
Which is basically the facing of the concrete walls, how it's done, what it looks like, and also the way that the parking area looks, the surfacing of the parking area, the look of it, as Councillor Fletcher has said, as part of that deferral.
So do I have someone to second that, please? Was that? Okay, Councillor Fletcher, thank you. We just read out that again, please, officer.
So it's defer to clarify the proposed drainage and how surface water is treated from the development, and to clarify the materials for the facing walls and the surfacing. Yeah, so I said materials for the facing walls and the surfacing of the car park. Then, just to clarify.
Take a vote on that deferral. All those in favour?
For.
All those against?
2 against.
Any abstentions? Therefore, the application is deferred for the reasons read out by the officer. Thank you. Okay, a 5-minute break. Thank you and welcome back. Moving on to next agenda item. This is DC 190678, which is land between South Lodge and Minster House, Littleworth Lane, Partridge Green. I'd invite the officer to make the presentation. Thank you.
Good evening. This application was first heard at the 20th of August 2020 Planning Committee meeting, where it was resolved to be approved subject to the completion of a Section 106 legal agreement, updated conditions, and a review of the monastery's business planning consultation with local members. This is all set out at paragraph 1.1 of the report. So to recap, this application relates to an open parcel of land set between two properties on the east side of Littleworth Lane in Partridge Green. The site falls outside the defined settlement boundary of Partridge Green and is not proposed for inclusion within the secondary settlement boundaries proposed within the submission Horsham District Local Plan. This is an aerial photograph of the site. The application proposes a single 5-bedroom house on the site as shown here. These are the proposed floor plans and the elevations. The application is sought as enabling development to provide funding to support repairs to the Grade 2 star listed guest house building at nearby St Hugh's Monastery. This is the location of the guest house in relation to the surrounding monastery buildings, which are also listed. This is the main elevation to the guest house. The application is accompanied by a suite of plans and reports setting out the poor condition of the building and the works that are required to help maintain its integrity. This plan shows the ground floor where water penetration and timber decay was located. This is the same for the first floor and the second floor. These photographs from 2019 show elements of the significant repairs required to the building, as do these. So since the resolution to grant was made in August 2020, and before completion of the legal agreement requiring the proceeds from the application site to be directed towards repairs to the guest house, the Natural England position statement was received requiring all development to achieve water neutrality. The applicant's water neutrality strategy seeks to offset the dwelling's water use by improved fixtures and fittings within St Hugh's Monastery, as explained in the report. This is considered acceptable to Natural England and will be secured in the legal agreement. It is also understood that works to the guest house to make the building watertight, as identified in the submission, have also now been completed. Nevertheless, the building still requires significant repair internally, whilst other parts of the estate are also understood to require investment. It therefore remains the case that the proceeds from this development would enable important and necessary repairs to the Grade 2 star listed building to continue. The application therefore remains recommended for approval, subject to the completion of the Section 106 agreement and the conditions as recommended. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On this application, there are no public speakers, so I will go to the local ward members and firstly to Councillor Lambert.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, we approved this in 2020. I'm not sure it was the 20th because 4 years have elapsed. It can't be a Tuesday. However, I was privileged to visit St Hugh's, which is an absolutely gorgeous building on the outside, and on the inside is so old and falling into disrepair that the guest house where I looked, you could actually, standing in the room, you could see daylight, and people, when they're visiting the lay brothers and the monks, stay in those rooms. So it desperately needed doing. They did do it in probably 21, maybe early 22. And the financial records that we viewed with the original application, if you remember that after lockdown, prices of building materials went through the roof. So in all probability, it cost a lot more than they were looking to achieve. So this money will offset whatever they've spent or help them to spend more inside. And the water neutrality statement will actually improve things for the monks, their mitigation, because all the fixtures and fittings that they use on a day-to-day basis will be renewed and repaired. The ecology condition 5 is vitally important because this piece of land has lain undisturbed since around 2002. The only problem with the application, but that is down to highways, is that in order to achieve the splays required for safety on Littleworth Lane, if you look at where the house is, we put a condition on that they had to be able to turn and leave in forward gear because the lane is not wide enough, because there's always parking on the opposite side to reverse out. So you have to come out in first gear. Even then, displays have to be sufficient to see to the de-restricted area and then down to the junction with Mill Lane. They don't have the ownership of enough land for displays. In the middle of the plot, there's a telegraph pole, also carries electricity, and the South Lodge has the hedge, which they then require, but that's within their remit to negotiate with them, and it will be down to highways whether or not they think they're sufficient. But in essence, it's been approved, and this is just for the water neutrality. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Knowles, do you?
This is an important local asset, and it does offer respite for weary and lost travellers. Anyone can go, any male can go and stay there, as well as friends and relatives of the monks and other people living there for a period of time. And so I think it does offer a interesting and unique resource for the locality, and I would like to see it remain, and that's not going to happen, unfortunately, unless the buildings are looked after. So I'm minded to support the application. Thank you.
Any other councillors like to make comments on this? I think you were just quicker, Councillor Knoll.
Thank you, Chairman. I was fortunate enough to accompany Councillor Lambert on her visit to the Carthusian Monastery, and I fully support what she said. It is a valuable part of our heritage within Horsham District Council and in the whole of the south of England. It's a beautiful building and it desperately needs to be preserved. The monks themselves cannot do anything because it's part of their creed not to. So having this building contribute towards the upkeep and the renovation of the guest house is vitally important, and I fully support this application.
Thank you. Councillor Circus.
Can I ask the officers, when more years ago, and I care to remember, we had the application for the housing development on the Abingworth site in Thacombe, it was termed an enabling application. Is that a recognised, was that just a nice way of talking about it, or is that a recognised category of application? And if it's a recognised category of application, is this an enabling application? And if so, do different rules, slightly different rules apply to a conventional application?
So in respect of heritage assets, enabling development is a thing. It's in the MPPF, and this is enabling development because it allows proceeds to go towards important upkeeps to heritage assets. Clearly, there needs to be a balance of considerations with the impact of the proposed development, but obviously a significant material consideration is the benefit, the public benefit, to restoring those buildings.
Thank you. Any other councillors wish to comment? Councillor Fletcher, yes.
I understand is an enabling development. I didn't have the opportunity to see the business plan, but my main concern over this application is to what extent this development really does enable the future of the guest house to be preserved. An enabling development is meant to be a last resort to save a building. And sorry, I've gone slightly out of sequence in what the argument I was trying to make here, but the documents that we've got are showing that the likely proceeds from building the house will be a very significant proportion of the total repair costs, and the relatively small gap would then be filled by potential donors who would be enthused by the possibility of making this happen. However, the donations website for the monastery says that as of January 24, the outstanding sum that's needed to repair the guest house is in excess of £1 million, which is now substantially greater than the estimated proceeds for the building that's being put there. So my concern is that in the absence of further income sources, and Historic England is no longer prepared to give money for this, that the gap between what is needed to secure a long-term future, not just to get the basics done, get the nice to have bits done and then keep it maintained into the future, that gap between the money that's being provided and the money that's available is much bigger than it was when the decision was made the last time around. And it is of some concern because I'm worried that we might come back, have another application for an enabling development outside our normal policies very quickly, when it's discovered that this is not enough to actually meet the objectives that were define it as an enabling development. I'm not sure that this means I'm able to looking to refuse it, but it is of real concern to me that this is the case, and it's a slight mystery to me that although this is defined as a last resort thing, the monastery owns quite substantial other lands. So there are the fields adjoining the A281, and there's the Moxford's cottages that are some distance away. And I'm a little confused as to why those sale of those assets wasn't pursued with more vigour in the best part of a decade that we've had since this started to become an urgent issue.
Councillor Lambert.
Thank you, Chairman. The enabling application that this refers to was the repairs to the guest house and only the guest house. And actually, I do still have the financial records if you want to see them. The rest of the monastery isn't covered by that, but their mother monastery is the monastery in France where they make chartreuse. And I'm sure if the main body of the monastery were to start falling into massive disrepair, they would help. They pay the annual running costs of the monastery. The mother monastery give to St. Hugh's that money. And I think actually it's the only Carthusian monastery we have in this country. But the running repairs, the small running repairs, are actually carried out by the monks and their lay brothers. But they won't come back cap in hand. I don't think they have. They won't. Mockford Cottage, which was renovated some time ago, they wouldn't sell that because it means people would be living too close to the monastery. The same as this was chosen because it is a fair distance from the monastery, whereas Mockford Cottage is actually a stone's throw away. It is. I walk up there daily. It is, and the monks actually walk past Mockford Cottage. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to respond to some of the comments there. There's no requirement that I'm aware of that enabling development must fund the entirety of works that are required to a building. A judgment must be made as to whether they'll be effective in what they're doing. Equally, in terms of other land opportunities to release funds, we must make a decision based on what's in front of us, which is a dwelling on this site, and whether that is acceptable in the balance with the benefits of the repair works this will enable. Clearly, there has been a number of works in the last few years, as Councillor Lambert has said, to make the building watertight. However, there's significant further works that are required, and therefore this would provide valuable funding towards that. There are also potentially opportunities in future to seek further resourcing to complete those works. But it shouldn't be the case that this application should be refused because it doesn't provide the entirety of the necessary funding. Thank you.
Okay, any further comments from members? Councillor Bainham.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just on this question of funding, whether they can actually fund it. I was just having a look at the annual accounts of the Carthusian Order in the UK. They have reserves of just over 3 million and an annual income of just over 2 million. And if this is the only Carthusian monastery in the country, I would have thought they would probably be able to cover it.
Thank you. Okay, I am going to move to a vote on this particular item. The recommendation is to approve planning permission subject to appropriate conditions and completion of the Section 106 legal agreement. All those in favour?
for.
Any against? Any abstentions? No. Therefore, the application is approved. Thank you. Moving on to the next agenda item number 10 is DC 230662 Dean Hollow, New Hall Lane, Small Dole. I invite the officer to make a presentation. Thank you.
This application was first heard at the May Committee this year, where it was deferred to seek further clarification on a number of matters as set out at paragraphs 1.1 and 6.1 of the report. To recap, this application relates to an agricultural barn located in the countryside rear of properties on New Hall Lane in Small Dole. The site and surrounding fields within this red line are connected to the dwelling at Dean Hollow, which fronts New Hall Lane. This is where the barn is located within the site and in relation to nearby properties. The barn is served by its own access track to the north from New Hall Lane. This is the barn as seen in historical aerial photographs. And these are the elevations and photographs showing its current poor condition. And this is the access track as seen from New Hall Lane, set between two properties further to the west of Dean Hollow. The application seeks to replace the barn with a new structure on largely the same footprint for use for the storage of agricultural equipment and feed associated with the wider land holding. This is the floor plan and elevations for the replacement barn, which will be completed in timber cladding with a dark corrugated roof. Note the plans detail doors to the north and west elevations as well as to the south. Satisfactory evidence demonstrating the need for the replacement barn has been provided, along with ecology reports to address any impact on bats. This has overcome the reasons why a previous application to refurbish the barn was refused. The supplementary information requested at the May Committee meeting has now been provided and is appended to the report. This includes clarification on the use of the barn, the land holding and registration number, the number of livestock, and the missing information that informed the advice of the agricultural consultants. Officers are of the view that the applicants have evidenced the need for the barn, therefore the application is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions as set out in the report, including a condition to ensure the barn is only used for agricultural purposes in connection with the host property at Dean Hollow. Since the publication of the report, officers have consulted with the building control team, and it has been clarified that agricultural buildings are usually exempt from the building regulations. As a result, officers recommend that the application should be approved subject to an additional condition requiring the provision of a fire hydrant as recommended by the County Fire and Rescue Service. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Public speaker Audrey Goodchild, please. Remind you that you have 2 minutes once you've started.
Thank you. My name is Audrey Goodchild. Sorry for that. I've just had my knee replaced. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity and to express our wishes for the future. I have recently reduced my working hours in order to pursue my passion for keeping and breeding sheep and pigs. I have been involved and worked with sheep and pigs most of my adult life, and at Dean Hollow we have had them for the last 15 years since I moved into that property. Now I have the opportunity to be able to allocate more time. I would like to expand my flock. To this end, when the land came up for purchase and the dilapidated barn came up for sale, we bought it. We want to rebuild the existing dilapidated barn so that it is usable for my sheep to lamb next spring, giving the lambs the best possible start to life. Also, we'd like to store the equipment that we use on the land, which is a tractor and trailer and stuff like that, which we use for moving the sheep and the feed. We will be using other land to graze the sheep also. We intend to also have pigs again in the future, which we haven't got at the moment, but we'd like to restart that up due to when we had COVID, we had a few problems getting them slaughtered. Our animals are bred for meat, which we sell, and we are committed to being organic, and we are very into the environment and the biodiversity. I have 2 youngsters who help me, 2 teenagers who are starting at Plumpton in September, and they have learnt to look after the animals and they help me do that. I've given you a supporting statement which I gave to you on the 14th of June 2024, which hopefully will explain the items that you wanted clarification on. Thank you very much for hearing me.
Thank you. Okay, moving to the ward members, and I will ask Councillor Croker first.
Don't mind, Chair, rather Councillor.
Okay, apologies. I was just going by
the alphabet,
yes.
Chairman. Yeah.
Councillor Knoll.
Okay, well, yes, we did speak briefly about this, and I said I'd go first. So thank you very much, Speaker. There has been a bit of further clarification there, and whilst the size and the location of this barn is not really of concern, I'm still slightly confused about the purpose. A similar application for a barn in this site was refused in December 2021 due to insufficient information being presented to this committee. And then again in May this year, another application was deferred, again due to lack of clarification on the actual purpose of this barn. There was a lack of detail provided at that time to show that the land to the south was actually a farmed small holding. Now, I know at the last committee meeting when this was discussed, I asked Officer, thank you very much, he's preempted what I was going to say. I asked him to show the actual grassland to the south, which would be presumably for the grazing of the sheep. Again, you can't see very much of it because it does go further south than the Google Earth image that we have in front of us. And basically the latest Google Earth image that I saw still had the southernmost field dedicated to pigs. So from the evidence we've heard this evening, though, the pigs are no longer there. However, I don't feel that the space being shown there is sufficient for having a flock. And I know it's been explained it's not entirely sheep because there were rams and lambs, but a flock of roughly 100, which was mentioned originally. So normally we would expect an agent's design and access statement to come forward, but we had a personal letter from the applicant, which we've also heard from tonight, saying that they purchased the land and the barn in 2023, but they have had pigs and poultry since 2009, when an RPA certificate was issued. I'm not a farmer. I don't understand what this has to do with the application, because it's not relevant to the barn. However, I'll let Councillor Potts try and explain, as he's a farmer and I'm not. So I'm going to ask him to speak in a minute. However, half the fields are not enough to actually have lambs and a sheep flock there. So if you look at that image, a lot of the land behind Dean Hollow comprises of other outbuildings, presumably related to the owners' other businesses. The actual area available for sheep rearing, as I pointed out, is actually very, very small. So if part of the barn is to be used for rearing sheep, what mention has been made of a water supply for this purpose? If there is water already supplied to the barn, why is there no water neutrality statement? We've heard nothing in this revised application that satisfies any of the doubts that the committee originally had last time. And as I said, I have nothing against this new replacement barn, but I still don't understand what it's for, and why no mention has been made of a water supply, which is surely a necessary part of rearing lambs.
Yes, just to respond to that. So the additional information that's appended to the report does explain further the applicant's use of the land in terms of livestock that they've kept and were seeking to keep on this land. I'll direct you to policy 26, which is our countryside protection policy. So it talks here about proposals must be essential to their countryside location and support the needs of agriculture. In the view of officers and the consultants at Reading Agricultural College, is that the evidence that has been provided about the applicant's current ownership of livestock, how they've farmed, albeit on a small scale over the last few years, is sufficient evidence that there is a need for an agricultural barn on this site. Also being a recognition that there is already a barn there, albeit it is in very poor state of repair. In terms of water, you don't need planning permission to farm land and to keep livestock. So whether or not there's a water supply already on this site is almost immaterial, because absent of a barn, any individual could provide a water supply and farm animals and water them accordingly. So officers in the past have considered whether agricultural barns are required to demonstrate water neutrality. We've considered it quite in depth. And our view is that because there is no absolute requirement to keep livestock indoors in a barn in itself does not always necessarily intensify the agricultural use of land. And given that it doesn't require planning permission to intensify agricultural use of land, therefore there's no increase in water consumption from a barn. Hopefully that answers your questions. Thank you.
I'm not going to go back and refer to an earlier application we've heard today, but it would seem that water would be necessary in a barn, but I'm prepared to accept what you say. Thank you.
Councillor Croker, yes.
Thank you, Chair. Broadly, I agree with a lot of the worries that Councillor Knoll has just expressed, particularly with regard to water. The original report that we deferred said that there's no clear or compelling evidence to suggest the nature and scale of the proposed development would result in a more intensive occupation use of the building. And given that the current building is, and I quote, full of rubbish, I would suggest that putting sheep in it is actually an intensification, but planning officers just explained that that probably doesn't count. Which worries me slightly when we have farm water consumption being reduced as an offset on new dwellings. Let's not go there for the moment. Based on what the applicant has said, it sounds to me as if livestock will be transported in and out of that site. And that brings me to another concern I have with regard to Newhall Lane, which is a private road. Its only legal status is a public footpath. And also just the access into this particular site. Given the number of animals involved, I would really like to see small trailers towed behind Land Rovers, or are we more likely to see larger vehicles attempting to get into that site? And the final point is with regard to the design of this barn. Now has a door on the northern aspect, which in the previous application it didn't. And I believe there were some concerns about that from a neighbour's point of view, but I'd just like to flag, and I think the officer has some sort of potential answer there. Thank you.
Okay, so just to respond, this application is not changing the use of the land. So the land is in agricultural use at the moment, it can hold livestock. Therefore, it is an officer's view, not a material consideration as to transport implications of introducing or transporting livestock on and off the site. It can happen today without this planning application. I've sort of explained water use already in my response, and there's a material difference here between the first application and this. The first was for a business unit that would support employment and therefore people occupying the site, the building, using water on a day-to-day basis. Whereas here it is a barn for the storage of hay during certain months, for farming equipment and potentially lambing as well. In terms of the doors, this is the plan here, which does, as you're quite correct, councillor, shows a door on the northern side, which would face towards the properties that are called here Elmfield Gardens. The existing barn does have a door that fronts those properties at the moment. If it is of a concern to members that might introduce an amenity issue, then we can condition that the doors are removed from the plans or defer for head of development to seek amended plans that remove those doors. So you're able to motion for that if that's of a concern to you. Thank you.
Yes, councillor Potts.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, the replacement of a dilapidated agricultural building for the purposes of agriculture should be encouraged wherever possible. The importance of lambing indoors, that cannot be overstated, nor can the safe storage of farm machinery. But we need reasonable evidence that there is an actual need. We've been provided with a CPH number, that's a county parish holding number. This is important, but on its own proves nothing of recent operations. There is a clear need to demonstrate that sufficient farming is still active, such as by providing up-to-date documentation on livestock numbers, land use, or recent agricultural business records. We have been provided with a movement form for 4 pigs from 2010. Even this does not include the departure CPH and is thus incomplete, so it cannot be relied upon. We have an incomplete application for the movement of sheep from last year, missing crucial information. This again proves nothing. Anyone could go online and fill out a form to the same effect right now and take a screenshot or download a copy. Proper evidence would consist of a receipt from the Livestock Information Service or other such authenticated documents or communication. We are also provided with the registered herd flock numbers. This proves the existence of livestock at some point. Indeed, one number relates to pigs, and we know there to be currently no pigs. If there is a genuine current agricultural need for a replacement barn, where is current or recent evidence? There is nothing since 2010, and even that is tenuous. In regards to the storage of farm machinery, Surely that is currently stored in the various other barns or outbuildings alluded to in representations, and that are also shown on the maps of the site. I would not imagine that all the machinery listed was all stored outside. Indeed, it would not be prudent to do so. We know already of the inconsistencies in this application. The applicant has provided information to try and clarify certain confusions, but question marks remain. Not least, we're told that this year's lambs are booked in for slaughter towards the end of November, I think it was. I'm not sure, but it was definitely November. This might be the case, but it'd be quite unusual so many months in advance. The weight and fitness of a lamb, and hence suitability for slaughter, depends on it's dependent on the maximum price. It follows that this is usually determined days before slaughter. It cannot be determined months in advance. There may be plans for more animals in the future, but I struggle to accept on the current information provided that there is current need for this barn. It would be very easy to provide documentation to confirm recent activity. This has not been forthcoming, despite requests. The agricultural consultant relies fully on what the application has said, without evidence. I would not constitute this as expert advice. How can it be? I do not think this opinion can be relied upon in this instance. I think it would be sensible to ask for a robust and recent evidence, and once again defer this application if that is possible. But if we are required to make a decision today, I'd be inclined to refuse on the basis it is not essential to its countryside location. Thank you.
If I can just clarify one point, it's not the case that you have to have an existing need. You have to have a need, but obviously no farm would ever expand if you could only build a building after you've got what you need to put in the building. So I think we have to recognise that, you know, enterprises can expand. Obviously they need to put forward a case for that expansion, but you wouldn't move all the machinery to the site in order to then demonstrate a need for the building. So I think it just to clarify that point is that there clearly has to be an identified need, but that doesn't necessarily have to be an existing need. The applicant has demonstrated through their supporting statements that they have some form of enterprise at the moment and they wish to expand upon that, and that's in which that part of the justification for the building, and obviously information has been submitted to seek to address that. So, and I think we just need to be mindful. We obviously need to take a consistent approach with agricultural buildings in the countryside and the level of information we're seeking in order for them to demonstrate that need. You may recall an application a little while ago at Peacock's Paddock, which was a retrospective application for a barn, which was approved. So I think we just need to be consistent and be confident we're not asking for information that is not necessarily required to make the application acceptable. We need to take a reasonable position based on the information before us, and obviously officers and our agricultural consultants are of the view that that has been demonstrated. Ultimately that's your decision, members, but I think we just need to be mindful of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the members? Councillor Trollope, yes.
It's just purely a personal opinion, but when I looked at the before and after pictures, I mean, I'm not sure I would want to live around that old dilapidated barn as it is. I'd be quite welcome it being fixed up and made into a nice new building, and I won't comment on any of the rest of it because I have nothing new to add, but just on that one point. So I'm minded to support this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Knoll.
Yeah, just one more question. I'm just hastily going through my paperwork trying to find it, but is the new barn the same size in floor space as the dilapidated barn that is there now? or is it larger?
It is broadly the same. This plan in front of us shows the current barn and it squares it off effectively at the top end there. So it is broadly speaking the same size.
But it will be higher, I take it, because
yes,
the old one is partially fallen down and you cannot actually see, or you can see the height of it.
Yeah, it's a pretty low structure at the moment, and it's not a huge barn, shall we say, in height for agricultural purposes, but it's sufficient.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I seek a clarification from officers? I thought there was going to be an extra condition added to this planning request, but I've not seen it mentioned at all.
This is the fire condition that I mentioned at the end of my presentation. So with a condition requiring.
I missed it. All right.
Yep.
Okay. With the added condition, to read that out. Adrian, we've got that. Okay, we've got the added condition on this particular application of the fire hydrant. I propose that we move to vote on this application with that condition added. All those in favour of the application?
For.
All those against?
Two against.
Any abstentions? Okay.
Abstention.
As per the recommendation, as per the opposition, to approve, the application is approved subject to the appropriate conditions. Thank you. Sorry, I'm speaking to the mic. Next agenda item is DC 230051, Carpe Diem, Nutbourne Road, Pulborough. Please could the officer make their presentation.
This application relates to a large detached house located in the countryside northwest of the defined settlement boundary of West Chiltington Common. Access to the site is taken from the northeast of our Nutbourne Road. I'll just pause whilst our guests leave. So this is an aerial photograph of the site as it was in 2018. And permission has subsequently been granted for a replacement house on the site as shown here under construction. The house is now complete. So this application seeks planning permission for a swimming pool and pool house that have been constructed in the rear garden of the house as shown here. This is a closer view of the layout. And these are the pool house elevations. This is a photograph of the swimming pool and pool house as built. The pool has a capacity of some 78,000 litres and has been filled from main supply. These are further photographs. The site is remote from other properties and officers consider it acceptable in amenity terms. The application includes approved efficiency taps and showers to the house to offset the water already used to fill the pool, and this will be offset over the next 5 years. The pool will be topped up via rainfall with a cover to minimise evaporation loss, and the cover is shown in this image. On this basis, the proposal is considered water neutral and is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions as set out in the report. Thank you.
Thank you. First public speaker is Abby Charland. If you could take 2 minutes, please.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Abby Charland and I'm a senior planner at Squires Planning. I'm here today speaking on behalf of the applicants. Following submission, the applicants have worked with Motion, a transport infrastructure and drainage design consultancy, and Horsham District Council to proactively find an amicable solution for this retrospective application. Today, we urge members to support the officer's recommendation for approval and permit this application. Following initial consultation responses, the applicant submitted a revised water neutrality statement on the 30th of May 24. This was sent to Natural England for reconsultation, and their response of the 11th of July 24 confirmed that they concur with the conclusion of the authority's HRA appropriate assessment insofar that they have no objections subject to the delivery, management and maintenance of measures identified in the water neutrality statement. To calculate the water mitigation measures, motion used the same method used in Part G calculations, which have been tried and tested since 2010. The water usage strategy confirms the proposal will be water neutral once complete, and as the pools are not commonly drained, this one-off pool fill will provide an ongoing net benefit after the 5-year mitigation period has expired. Mains water will not be required to top up the pool, and Natural England accept, together with the proposed solar cover made from permeable materials, that lets rainfall through to make the most out of rainfall gain and stops evaporation. Following this response and the recommendation for approval, our client agrees to the proposed post-occupation condition 1, which is detailed in the committee report. It should be noted that return the water to the ground is not a viable option due to the contaminated nature of the chlorinated water, which will waste 78,000 litres. It is clear that there are no other technical consulting objections to the proposal, and that your professional planning officer has correctly considered all relevant material considerations and reached their recommendation of approval. As such, we hope the committee supports that recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Roger Curtis, please. And you have 2 minutes.
We strongly object because of the gross overdevelopment of this site. All amendments to the originally approved 3-bed building have been made retrospectively or via minor amendments and are entirely out of keeping with the landscape and rural surroundings. Full statements included to the council claim that the pool building is not visible from any footpaths. It is. Retrospective planning may give the impression that property owners are bypassing established rules and undermining public trust in the planning process. Granting retrospective permission might set a precedent for others to build without approvals, potentially leading to widespread non-compliance and poor planning outcomes. It makes a mockery of water neutrality statements. No provision for rainwater harvesting or recycling of wastewater has been given. On average, swimming pools lose about 1/4 of an inch of water each day, with variation in wind intensity, humidity, and sunlight drastically changing water loss rates. The applicant's report states that a cover will be in place which will reduce evaporation, but that cover will not be in place during those months of the year and through the hotter weather patterns to reduce water evaporation to the extent stated. Water neutrality calculations are not realistic. The property is a bigger development than originally planned and will therefore necessitate a higher volume of water. Data has been provided regarding rainfall, but there is no guarantee that we will get a certain level of rainfall. And as already stated above, water evaporation will become an issue which will not be met by rainfall. In conclusion, the initial plan approved by the council was for a replacement 3-bed dwelling. We now have a 4-bed dwelling with further additional buildings added over time and which make higher demands on water provision.
Could I ask that you bring your...
Hence their new reliance on mains water. Where and when will this end?
Thank you. Okay, Chris Fagan, West Chiltington Parish Council, you have 5 minutes.
Good evening, everyone. West Chiltington Parish Council objects to this retrospective application for the installation of a leisure building and swimming pool. The pool and building were installed almost 2 years ago, at a time when, due to water neutrality, an application of this type would almost certainly have been rejected. The first point to make is that the original and revised water neutrality statements seem to be flawed in many different ways. I will not take up time listing the flaws in full. However, as an example, it states that rainwater alone will avoid any need for topping up the pool. This would appear to be based on the assumption that rainwater falls evenly through the year. However, the pattern of rainfall in the UK would suggest that it is at its least when the pool is being used the most, and hence evaporation is at its highest. Whilst the Parish Council has various concerns regarding the validity of the latest water neutrality report, we do note that it has been accepted by HDC's Planning Department and Natural England. In our view, it fails to satisfy the high bar of certainty around water neutrality, which was originally demanded by both HDC and Natural England. We would therefore urge the committee to question the extent to which HDC and Natural England have investigated the basis and findings of the report, rather than just accepting it at face value. We also note that neighbours who had no opportunity to comment on the development before completion have since raised issues regarding noise, high frequency of use and overlooking issues. The most significant point and the key reason that the Parish Council objects to this application is that the pool was installed without planning permission at a time when the water neutrality issue was stopping virtually all development. Water neutrality was an issue that was widely publicised at the time, and hence the homeowner and the homeowner's professional advisors would have undoubtedly been aware of it. It may therefore be that the applicant made a deliberate decision to proceed with the development to avoid refusal because of water neutrality, all done with the expectation that they would gain approval through a retrospective application. We also note that there have been 7 enforcement inquiries relating to this property since 2021, and whilst the Parish Council cannot see the full detail of all of these inquiries, we would urge the committee to check if this retrospective application is another case of seeking to circumvent planning rules by the same applicant. In summary, to permit this application would, in the Parish Council's view, create an unwelcome and dangerous precedent regarding making retrospective applications. If the committee decides that it is undesirable to remove the building and the swimming pool, we would urge the committee and HDC to consider what other sanctions could be applied. This would act as a deterrent to this applicant and others from undertaking works and then making retrospective applications simply as a means of circumventing planning rules. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, number of points raised there. Starting point in all of this is that there's nothing unlawful in applying retrospectively for a development, as you'll be well aware. It's expressly allowed for in the planning acts. So therefore, the material consideration should be on the basis of this was being proposed in front of you, would you be granting permission? A number of comments have been made around other development that's taken place at the dwelling, breaches of planning control, amendments to planning permissions, etc. And none of those are material in this case because we are purely looking at whether this swimming pool and pool house are acceptable in their own right. In respect of the water neutrality statement, as you'll see in the report, officers have given considerable consideration to the data that has been submitted. There is nothing flawed in the data in terms of rainfall figures. From my own research on the water neutrality, it is not always the case that the summer months are always the driest. We have had a very wet, I think it was June or July this year. And in other years, we've had very dry Februaries, for instance. So the correlation that we all have in our minds that summers are incredibly dry and winters are incredibly wet is not always the case. Nevertheless, the data shows that this 52 square meters of swimming pool is capable of capturing some 44,000 litres of rainwater each year, which equates roughly to 3,600 litres per month, or 100 litres per day if we really want to go down to that level. So the view of officers is that level of rainwater capture alone is sufficient to ensure that this is topped up and that it won't need to rely on main supply moving forward. In any case, the water that has been used to fill this swimming pool is being offset through improved efficiencies over the next 5 years within the dwelling, and those efficiencies will carry on in future beyond those 5 years. So having looked at the data carefully, officers, in tandem with Natural England's views, are satisfied that this has demonstrated water neutrality. Clearly, it's regrettable it's a retrospective application, but in the officers' advice is that should not influence the decision that you make today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All on the ward councillors, Councillor Campbell.
Thank you very much, Chair. I have a few concerns about this one. Obviously, we've heard comments from various people. My major question is, there was a statement made by one of the speakers that pools are not commonly refilled. And just out of interest this afternoon, I did a quick bit of research on the internet, and I put in how often are pools refilled, and the first answer that came up, typically every 3 to 5 years. And I'm curious as to why it would not be the case in this instance.
All I can say is the document that was submitted with the application from Compass, who installed the pool, sets out an explanation of why they don't need to refill. A lot of refills happen because of natural water being lost through the structure of the swimming pool. In this case, it's a more secure structure. Are you talking in terms of health?
What I read was that over time, that with the constant use of chemicals, it becomes a need after a period of time for that water to be replaced and with clean, fresh water, and you start the process again.
We have to make a decision based on the evidence in front of us, which is this document from the installers, which says that's not the case in terms of their product. And so on that basis, from a sort of professional document, if you like here, officers are of the view that this can continue to be water neutral.
Thank you. If you could. Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. I wasn't going to do this, but I will now. Basically, it's been established that actually the pool has been filled up from the water mains because they only use the borehole for a limited amount of time. So that's been clarified. I query some of the calculations and documentation on water neutrality, unsurprisingly. If we look at the rainfall data based on North Heath numbers, there are some summer months where one can question the ability to keep the pool topped up. I refer specifically, when I looked at the numbers for the last 3 years, if you look at the number for May, I think it was May, excluding 2024, and I will go into the calculations in a minute, and I ask you to bear with me on the numbers. I refer to, in the documentation, to Appendix E at the table. For one, the evaporation number is incorrect, as the evaporation loss would be 59 litres, not 50 litres, which is calculated as 52 divided by 44 times 50, which is 59. Claimed evaporation losses, I calculate to be 502 litres per month, which is not in line with the data. I don't understand the logic supplied in the data by the pool manufacturer, because on page 5 of its documentation, it claims that the pool cover eliminates evaporation completely when the cover is drawn, which implies that the cover is impermeable. And yet, in the water gain through cover section, the manufacturer claims that the Compass pool cover will allow using a permeable PVC or polycarbonate slapped material, will let in rainwater but will have no losses. Think about that statement. Now, unless this is a one-way process, it seems that even when not in use, the pool would suffer from some losses from evaporation, as was outlined by one of the speakers. You can't be impermeable one way unless there's some magic material that is in use. There is no data, from what I can see, about evaporation losses with a Compass pool cover. My sense of fluid flows is that it's a two-way flow, not a single flow. And statement in officer's report, paragraph 6.7, seems to me to be incorrect, because that statement seems to be based on an impermeable cover and not a Compass cover. So evaporation losses seem to be a lot higher than what has been stated. rainwater harvest. So the lowest rainwater harvest, according to my calculations, would be 2,288 litres for the month. So in theory, there's a 50% surplus of water. But what is the cover water evaporation coefficient? It's not stated. So basically, if I take my calculations of 1,020.4, there's a surplus of 1,267 litres for the month. But I find it hard to believe the pool is only going to be used as weekends, as stated by the applicant. And certainly have a problem that believing that for a summer break. Use of the pool every day for a month would certainly add to a loss per month, plus evaporation, as I've explained. So if the pool cover was off for the month, do we seriously think the pool users would replace the cover every night after using it, either the weekend or the day? I question that. So if I look at the evaporation and calculate it, I end up with about 1,300 litres. So despite the water neutrality statement referring to rainwater capture being potentially 44,000 litres per year, so 33,666 litres per month, that doesn't work it out if you calculated it individually by month, if you look at the rainfall. I also question the water neutrality calculations, but I understand why. But basically, we're using 2.96 bodies in a 4-bedroomed house, which is a theoretical calculation. But the documentation supplied by the applicant state that there's 4 people in the house. So which is it? So the calculations for me, I'm not too happy about it. I understand that 2.96 is more precautionary, but it just reduces my confidence in the numbers, if I can put it that way. Basically, there is also, it's been raised, the question of precedent. I understand the practical issue that the pool is built, it's been filled. We're not going to dump the water over the side because it's got chlorine in it and all the rest of it. So we have to suck it up and live with it. Not really happy with the whole thing. So what I'm saying is I don't have an answer for this, but when I look at the water neutrality statement and calculations, I'm not convinced. And when I look at the applicant's statement to do with this pool, I'm even less convinced. I'm happy to be convinced, but with what I have seen in front of us and presented to us by officers, I'm not convinced. Thank you. I'm sorry for taking so long.
Okay. You're within time there, Mr. Councillor Clark.
I will very briefly respond, so I won't go into every number you raised there, councillor. I will just flag on the 2.96 and 4 persons that the 2.96 is based on the occupancy of the dwelling for the purposes of the efficiencies to create the water saving over 5 years. So it downplays occupancy. The 4 persons is based on actually the water consumption from the pool or the water loss from drip, etc. So in both cases, the figures are precautionary by pushing apart, shall we say. So officers are satisfied by that. As I said before, irrespective of sort of evaporation rates, etc., the view of officers is that volume of water across a year that would land on that pool would recover those losses, irrespective of sort of numbers of persons, nature of use, etc. And that has informed our recommendation in front of you. Thank you.
Sure, who was first, but Councillor Trollope.
I have a very quick question. Thank you, Chair. 2.9 people, do they really use a pool's worth of water in 5 years? Because you said it's offset in 5 years by the initial fill. I can't believe just shy of 3 people would use that much water in 5 years. Or am I misunderstanding something?
Well, it's the savings from the other fixtures and fittings in the property each day across a 5-year period to say 78,000 litres. It sounds a lot, but actually the numbers do stack up on that front.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor van der Burg.
This is an application for a swimming pool. What would be, if somebody wanted to apply for a swimming pool would it naturally come to the committee, or would it be delegated, and would it be granted? Are we in the process of saying people can't have swimming pools, or how is it actually treated if somebody wants to apply for a swimming pool?
we have had applications for swimming pools and they've all been determined under delegated powers. Ordinarily request that the initial fill is from a tanker outside of the supply zone and that they evidence effectively how top up and other efficiencies in the property will help ensure it's a neutral position. Thank you.
Councillor Perry.
Yes, I mean, I haven't got the calculations in my head, but I have lived in a house with a swimming pool for 7 years. And I think it's human nature that you do not leave your cover on all the time in the summer months. You've got friends around, you want to show you have your pool, the cover is off. So there will be more evaporation than probably is in the calculations. And in answer to Councillor Campbell, things happen. Over 7 years, we have had to refill our pool, even though we didn't want to. Because something went wrong with the mechanics of one of the pumps and the water drained away and we did have to keep filling it up. So I think things happen. I don't think it's totally credible to rely on this data. And I don't have the calculations as Councillor Clark does, but experience tells me it's not as credible as it looks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bainham.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. We had the representative of the parish council suggesting that if we approve this application, we should nevertheless impose sanctions on the applicant. I would just like to say that if they haven't breached any rules, there wouldn't be any basis to impose sanctions. And even if we did want to, we don't have any authority to impose sanctions, as I understand it. So is that correct?
That is correct. If you refuse planning permission, there's no legal precedent or legal requirement at all for sanctions. That would be completely unreasonable and inappropriate.
Okay, 3 hands simultaneously. I'll start with Councillor Croker.
Thank you, Chair. Like other members, I'm definitely concerned about the precedent this might set if we approve it. But I don't really see a way out of it. The second point I'd like to make, though, is I believe the officer said that in speaking about retrospective planning, you should treat it as if it was a new plan before us. On that basis, I'd be inclined not to approve an application that was going to use 78 cubic meters of water unless there was some offset today, because we're told frequently that we have to judge these applications on where we are today, not what might happen in the future. So I do have concerns. I don't know whether there is any way of not setting a precedent, and I'll be interested to hear from the officers if there is. Thank you.
To be honest, I think it's much easier for an applicant to demonstrate water neutrality for a swimming pool when they've not built it than when it is. So I don't think, personally, I don't think this sets a precedent. You have a slightly unique situation here, with an application for a development that involves water that's already been used. I suspect this is probably the first time in the country this has been dealt with of this nature, and I just think we need to take a pragmatic approach to it. I recognise it's challenging, but I think we as officers have tried to put forward a recommendation that is reasonable and that does recoup that water. I think it is a unique circumstance, so in that respect I think a unique solution is a reasonable approach. Obviously, if members are particularly concerned by the actual details of the numbers, you know, it could be deferred or delegated subject to further resolution. I think my view is there is likely to be a solution, but perhaps some further clarification on the numbers is needed. But obviously that decision rests with you in terms of how you wish to move forward with this application. Thank you.
Come to you in a moment, Councillor. Okay, we've seen a lot of hands going up all at once. Councillor Croker, as you
just to come back on that, it may be unique today, but what's going to happen tomorrow? You know, I want a swimming pool. I'll just go ahead and dig it, fill it up, and apply for planning permission later. I don't have an answer, but I'm not convinced by your answer with respect. Thank you.
Right, I will go around and I'll come to you in a moment. Councillor Knowles, but Councillor Potts.
Thank you, Chairman. I agree with the officers, the difficulty with this, and agree that we need an element of pragmatism. Nonetheless, just one point. The amount of water used through backwashing depends very much on how well a pool is maintained. In short, the dirtier the water, the more water to waste. Emptying a pool is often cheaper than the alternative of using chemicals, so that it can be replaced with clean water. And chlorine shock treatments, etc., are incredibly expensive. Certainly those with pools that I know empty and refill, sadly, rather than use chemicals after heavy use or periods of low maintenance. So the figure of 500 litres of water is tiny in this respect. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll come to you in a moment, Councillor Knowles, but Councillor Circus was just before you.
First of all, can I ask, it was a point that was hinted at, well, maybe more than hinted at, by one of the speakers as to the notification of people affected. Now, what about these houses in my ward, which are over the border? Were they notified? They look as if they're, you know, within a reasonable distance of what we're discussing now. So that's a question, and I've got some comments.
Thank you.
So shall I?
Just clarify there, any property that abuts the red line of the application site would have been consulted. So you can see on this drawing here where I've slightly crudely drawn the red line, all those properties to the south there that abut would have been consulted. Right. The red line also, according to this, goes all the way up to Nutbourne Road. So in theory, also those properties along the access there as well.
Right, okay. I have to say that I think that the case was well put by the representative of West Georgington Parish Council that rainfall doesn't come evenly throughout the year. And when the pool is most likely to be in use, is likely to be the least rainfall. I can't help feeling that if you compare this with the first application, in the first application, we had I thought, a quite sensible approach to water neutrality. I think what we've got here is an approach that really stretches credulity. And I think that's come out of the discussion. And I think we need to take water neutrality much more seriously than trying to contort ourselves into coming up with a theoretical justification that lacks any basis in the real world. Because after all, I mean, we are hoping that we will be able to have fewer properties built in our local plan because of water neutrality. And I think it therefore behoves us to take the issue of water neutrality seriously. And I don't think we're taking it seriously if we are, see, I don't think this is a pragmatic approach, as was suggested by officers. I think this is, what we're being presented with is an answer to water neutrality that simply stretches credulity. And I think on that basis, we should take the view that we are not satisfied that the case that this is water neutral has been made out. And therefore, I think to be consistent, for example, with where we were on the first application, I think we should turn down the application. Thank you.
Councillor Knowles, thank you for waiting.
Thank you. Can we go back to a picture of the pool, please, with the cover? The height of the water is such that when it does rain, a lot of that water will be lost over the side of the pool, I imagine. And that when I'm wondering whether there's a system that we could look at that would see that water drain and therefore be available for topping up the pool during the months when it's being used to cover evaporation. A tank alongside it.
I think, you know, whether there's other options in terms of water capture to facilitate this swimming pool is something that could be explored. I think it obviously there needs to be an outcome in terms of whether the proposal is voted on as printed, whether it's deferred, and if it's deferred, what additional information is considered necessary, or obviously whether members wish to refuse it. So I do think Councillor Knowles, it is an option if members wish to defer it, to see whether there are alternative solutions, or to re-look at the water neutrality figures. That's an option open to members. Obviously that would need to be put forward as an emotion and voted on. Thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Finnegan.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question. I appreciate what Councillor Croker said in the past about setting a precedent. It does make me nervous. And I appreciate that also swimming pools often just get approved under delegated authority. There was one probably within the last year in the Colgate parish, which was approved. And as was mentioned by the officers earlier, the water had to be tanked in from a different supply zone. We're assuming this Compass company doesn't require topping up or refilling after a number of years. Is there any way of setting a condition that if they did require a complete refill, that has to be done from a different supply zone? Thank you.
That's not unreasonable to request a condition to do that, yes.
Councillor Knoll, apologies, I was just taking some notes. I was aware that you had your hand raised.
That's okay, don't worry. I just want to throw something else into the mix. Rainwater, and I know, and we all realise when our cars turn yellow from southern rain coming in, rainwater is not clean. Rainwater is dirty a lot of the time. And so I think this throws the calculations out slightly, because you are quoting the fact that rainwater is going to top up the pool. It's going to require backwashing, which requires even more fresh water. So I don't believe that the rainwater calculations that have been added into this to make it water neutral are correct.
You just. Okay, in order to move things, sorry, Councillor Vanderbilt.
Thank you. Yeah, look, I think that the tracking the water in thing, if we can build that in, that sounds like a pretty sensible idea. If we were to approve it with that as a condition, would be a consideration presumably, or alternatively defer it and also look at additional water storage opportunities there, because you know there's plenty of options out there for that sort of thing.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. One more question, because I'm keen to move this forward. So, Councillor Fletcher.
I think there are some quite serious concerns over these water neutrality calculations. I've been pondering whether or not it would be acceptable to make a condition that the pool was not topped up from the mains, and I was a little surprised when the officers were quite happy about that, because unless there was a demonstrated way of rainwater harvesting and storage, the temptation would be to run a hose in and top it up. And I'm wondering whether you could actually genuinely say that that was something that you could ensure compliance with. It would be very difficult to stop that happening. So I was a bit doubtful about that, and therefore going back to thinking about whether we should be deferring for more detailed calculations on the overall balance of the water in and the water out, and potentially the opportunity for rainwater harvesting to be part of the solution.
Can just clarify the officer's comment there regarding refill. I think it's not what you interpreted it to be, Councillor Fletcher. I think officers are of the view there needs to be a solution to general maintenance and evaporation and loss of the pool. Then there needs to be a solution which is not tankering in that water. But the pool has been designed that it doesn't need to be completely emptied and refilled. But as Councillor Perry said, there might be an unforeseen circumstance where that does need to happen. And I think it's in that instance that officers would be comfortable with a condition around filling that through water, through, you know, tanker it in, etc. In that unforeseen circumstance, but general maintenance of the pool should be able to be found through a water neutrality solution. Thank you.
Okay, we've heard a number of points here this evening about wishing to defer to get more details on the water neutrality and clarify what's been put forward, or delegated to the officers to deal with if we were minded to approve, and with the condition put forward by Finnegan, Councillor Finnegan, apologies, Victoria. So they're the options to us. Does Councillor Clark?
Thank you, Chairman. I propose that we defer this application and seek to better understand the water neutrality calculations, the systems for refilling and maintenance of the pool, and how to provide the water to do that, and to ensure that the pool is not connected up to the mains. Well, I mean, that's the second one was about, well, okay, to look at rainwater, how to cover the surplus in the winter with the rainfall lack in the summer, put it that way. And to review the technical side of the covers, etc., and the calculations. It's a bit confused, but I think you get the gist of what I'm trying to say.
Okay, are you able to capture that?
I think it's fine, Chairman, to defer it to have further information and clarity on water neutrality. I think we can cover the details with the applicant, but I think that's sufficient in terms of a reason to defer. Thank you.
So at that point, I'll ask to vote on this.
Second.
Sorry. Oh, sorry. Yes, I need a seconder for that. Councillor Finnegan, thank you. All those in favour of deferring this for the reason given by the officer?
For.
Okay, all those against? Sorry, all those against? No. Any abstentions? 2. Is that
1 against and 2 abstentions.
okay? Therefore, this application is to be deferred. Thank you. And moving on to the final item. Excuse me, sorry, we've still got one more item. Sorry. It's only going to be very quick. I just want to say before we bring the meeting to a close, I'd like to thank the officers for their comprehensive report, their presentations and contributions this evening, as well as the members for their contributions and reasoned debate, and the public who are about to leave for their patience. And at 20:09, I bring the meeting to a close. Thank you. Now it's closed. Members bring their microphones and to the front and their cups to the side there. So